Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for clicking. If it means a lot that you guys keep clicking. If you guys keep clicking, I'll keep making. And today we're going to be ranking all 42 final jurors, meaning the players voted out right before final tribal council. I'm going to be ranking them on their games, obviously not their characters, to be clear. You may disagree. It's okay. No need to freak out. Like, share, subscribe if you're new because it's free, it's easy, and it really helps the channel out. At number 42, we have Christina, someone who was socially ostracized from her own tribe. Well, really, I should say tribes, because every single tribe she was on, she was on the bottom of it, including the merged tribe. She had chances to make moves and just either didn't make them or tried to make them and failed. No matter who she was with, she was always the butt of the joke, never socially connected, never tried to really make a big move against Kim, the best player of the season, wanted to go to the end with Kim, the best player of the season. I mean, it's horrible across the board. And I think whereas in people who we're about to get to have flaws in their game, I feel like they at least had a backbone and were at least actively trying to win the game, which I can't really say about Christina and her gameplay. At number 41, I have Keith Famey from the Australian Outback, and I think Keith's biggest problem for me is the fact that he was always in a spot where he was in the Onion Alliance, which is to an extent kind of impressive, but he was with two people who were always going to choose each other over him, no matter how much it benefited their game to drag him to the end. I think both Tina and Colby would have both brought each other to the end just based off of quote unquote integrity. And so I feel like to me, Keith's game was always going to end at 3. He's one of these people, and you're going to see this as a trend on the bottom of this list, people who are always going to be in the spot that they went out. They were always at the bottom of their core alliance and were always going to be like that extra boot at the end who just kind of got kicked out right before final tribal. At number 40, I have Jan from Survivor Thailand. At number 39, I have Sundra from Survivor Cook Island. Sundra to me is someone who, again, was always going to be in the spot. I think Yul and Becky were closer than Sundra and Ozzy were, and it was always going to be Yul versus Ozzy. And really, I think Becky was just smart enough to get in with Yul, or at least get in with one of them, whereas Sundra to me always felt like kind of on the outs of that group. Obviously, the two girls were always kind of the weaker players, but I feel like Becky had a very close relationship with Yul, whereas Sundra just didn't really have that. She also didn't play the game at all, had a bad, just overall just did not play the game well at all. But as far as her chances to get to the end, I think they were minimal at best. Maybe like Ozzy going out at 4 if he lost immunity. That's about it for her entire game, and she never wins in any circumstance. So I feel like to me that it's really hard to put her any higher than down here. All right, this may be an unpopular opinion, but I have Cass at number 38. That's right, Chaos Cass. I feel like to me people focus on her personality so much and how much she's, said that she's cutthroat and this and that and how fun she is to watch, and they confuse that with her being a great player, a great female strategist, and I feel like that's just not the case. I mean, she was never winning her season. There isn't one person that she could have gotten to the end with and won against. Her versus Morgan, the girl with the huge knockers. Yes, Morgan would have beaten Cass. It's bad. It's just bad if that's the case to me. And as much as she may have kind of been involved in some blindsides and been pretty salty towards some players on the way out, like Trish, it doesn't mean that she planned those blindsides, controlled those blindsides, or even sometimes knew that they were happening. And so for me, my biggest gripe with her is the fact that she, one, didn't really play that impressive of a strategical game, and on top of that was never winning the game because her social gameplay was so god-awful. At number 37, I have Brett. Again, this is basically the exact opposite. Whereas in Cass did have some strategy but had zero chance of winning, Brett had a decent chance of winning whether the Galoos won out, which didn't happen, or the Foas went out, which did happen. I mean, he almost won if Russell had lost the Final Four immunity challenge. And on top of that, if the Galoos had won out, I think he was in the best spot socially to kind of glide to the end and win and get like the votes of Russell and people like that who were just bitter against the Galoos for pagonging them. And so I feel like to me he has a good shot of winning. Again, it's the opposite of Cass. He has no gameplay, he has no bite to him as a player, whereas Cass has way too much bite as a player. At number 36, I have Heather. Again, Heather is interesting because I thought Heather would be even lower on the list, but I will say Heather did at least be in a good spot in the game. She was never really on the bottom anywhere that she went, which I really can't say for the rest of these people. I mean, I feel like Heather was never really the person to get out, and I don't think she was necessarily the biggest GOAT that we've had so far on this list. I think she kind of ends up here just because she's not god-awful in any specific place other than her physical game, obviously, but lucky for her, that part of the game is not as important nowadays. And so I feel like, to me, she's not the worst in anything, but she's just not really a good player, and she's not really a good jury threat either. People liked her, but they didn't love her. At number 35, I have Denise from China. I think, to me, the interesting thing with Denise is, like, does she win if she gets to the end against, like, for an example, a Courtney and Amanda, if they all vote out Todd at 4? I think probably Amanda or Courtney pulls it out. Honestly, maybe Courtney, which would have been absolutely insane. I think it depends on if the jury is voting for story and like ability, or if they're voting on gameplay. And although I think maybe they would have liked Denise's story, I think in the end they voted gameplay because it's obviously Todd won over Amanda and Courtney. The more, I guess, not as strategically cold people there. I feel like, to me, the biggest thing is if they were voting not on gameplay, they would have voted for Amanda to win the game, as Amanda was the more digestible person at Final Tribal. But I think they would vote based off gameplay, making Denise's plea to win the game not really valid anymore, as she was more of a story than a gameplay person. At number 34, I have Eddie from Survivor Karamoan. I think Eddie is interesting because although he was with Reynolds making moves, all of the moves that he made with Reynolds were all Reynolds, right? I think he made all the moves, and I think Eddie just kind of sat there as a meat shield. He let Malcolm also make moves when they teamed up with Malcolm at the merge. I feel like, to me, Eddie really didn't make any moves in the game. I think Eddie could have won it if he got to the end against Cochran, just because the other two amigos were on the jury and could have fought for him. But I think, honestly, he wouldn't have to deserve the win anyway. And I feel like, to me, he didn't really play a game worthy of a high spot on this list, although I do think he did have a shot to win, which is more than I can say for people like, for an example, Cass, Sandra, Jan, Keith, Christina, people like that. And at number 33, I'm going to throw Erin in the mix. I think, to me, the biggest thing with Erin is the fact that Erin never really had a shot to win unless she was at the end with people from the pre-merge, which is a big no-no. What I do like about Erin's game is that she does play actively. She tries to flip the game at all times. She's kind of in a Christina spot where she was kind of the social outcast of her tribe, except she actually tried and was much more aggressive than someone like a Christina was, and that's why she's 10 spots higher than her on the list. At number 32, I have Ashley Underwood from Survivor Redemption Island, someone who I think honestly doesn't really play the game until the end, although I think it's how close she came at the end to booting Rob out and kind of taking his spot, because she had two goats there in Natalie and in Philip that were beatable. She just simply could not get Rob out because of the immunity challenge, and also the fact that Philip was just being absolutely herded by Rob as his goat. At number 31, I have Scout from Survivor Vanuatu. I feel like, to me, the biggest thing that makes Scout at least a little impressive is the fact that her plan of going to the end would have worked and could have worked, and it really came down to Chris winning immunity in the final 2 rounds of the game. I think her and Twyla navigate that post-merge pretty well for the most part, getting out most of the guys who Chris would have chosen over them if they had flipped too early. They got out most of the guys, kept Chris, then they flipped back to Chris at 7. I feel like, to me, from there on, they control the entire post-merge along with Chris. I think the issue is there, obviously, Chris is always going to win that final immunity challenge, and so, to me, the biggest issue with them is that. I will say, though, Scout getting to the end with her main ally in Twyla would have resulted in a win, which I can't say for people like Christina, for example, who were dying to go to the end with people who were clearly going to demolish them, or like for an example, a Sandra who wanted to go to the end with Ozzy and Yul, 2 people who would destroy her at the end. I think Scout had a plan, and if it had worked, it would have been much more impressive than like a Christina or a Sandra, for an example. Number 30, I have Kara, I don't know. You guys can tell me in the comments. Whenever I say this girl's name, I always just kind of get it wrong and forget to look it up. and she's so irrelevant that I really don't care to figure it out. But to me, the big thing with her is the fact that her game did have a lot of gameplay. She did navigate the post-merge pretty well. She was just never going to win. She was never going to beat Mike. At least I don't think so. She was never beating a Nick. She was never beating Davey. These people who she actively didn't try to blindside, at least. Maybe she didn't plan on going to the end with them, but I think she didn't actively try hard enough to get them out. Also, it seemed like her plan was to go with like an Allison and like maybe like an Alec, which to me shows bad judgment, as she probably gets beat by both of those players pretty easily at the end. At number 29, I have Laurel, someone who I think similar to Kiara, whatever the hell her name is, that I just talked about. She navigates the game pretty well, is ingrained in a bunch of alliances, has options, but she's just never going to win with the people who she wanted to go with. And I think this is like a real common story among this bottom like 15 players, even like bottom 20 or 25. To me, it's like if your plan is to go lose the game, I mean, like, how can I respect your plan? Whether you realize it or not, if your plan makes you lose the game, your plan is not a good plan, and it shows a lack of judgment. I think someone's judgment, how somebody sees the game and whether that view is valid or not, is a big thing to me personally when judging players, and I just don't see that from Laurel. And so for that reason, I have to put her low here. At number 28, and this is a really interesting kind of break from the same kind of stuff that I've been saying for the past few players, and really for anyone so far and anyone after, because it's season 1, it's Rudy. I think that Rudy is interesting because the big thing with Rudy is obviously he's playing a different game. So I tried to judge it based off of his social gameplay, because that's really what's consistent. Now, I think it's really impressive that Rudy gets into the only alliance in the game, is willing to get over that. I like his attitude of I need to fit in with them, they don't need to fit in with me. I like that like not stuck up attitude, unlike the other old player in BB. I think to me is very impressive there. On top of that, I think that it's impressive that he's able to get a number 1 ally in Rich, which is super important. And I think he recognizes the importance of that, especially once the alliance gets down to 4, which helps him. I think his only issue is he does know that when it gets to 3, Rich is not going to throw his game for him. He knows that Rich is playing the game pretty well. So he essentially is putting his entire game on the final 3 immunity challenge, which I think to me is not good gameplay at all, especially since his threat level was way too high throughout the game. He needed to keep that lower, because at 3 he basically put his whole game on I have to win out, and that's not a good strategy for me. Although very impressive, it's just not a fantastic game to me. Sticking with players from Borneo, I have Jenna Lewis at 27. I think her game is really interesting because although I don't think she was necessarily like the best winner person, she almost won the season. I mean, if she gets to the end with Amber, she probably wins against Amber. And if she gets to the end against Boss and Rob there, she probably also has a decent shot. Although in my personal opinion, I would really hope that the All-Stars jury wouldn't vote to give Jenna Lewis the win there. But then again, they were so bitter that she had a shot there. Again, her whole game was put on in immunity challenge, and I think that's really the biggest issue for me, is like her whole game came down to at 3 beating Boss and Rob in a game of pure will. You can't do that. You just cannot do that. Although I will say she navigates the game well. She gets the anti-winner sentiment during the pre-merge going and strong. I think it's awesome. I think her strategy is pretty good. Her social gameplay is also pretty good. Having Rupert as a number 1 ally is pretty good. She plays the end game pretty darn well. I think the big issue for me is the fact that her whole game comes down to 1 challenge in a spot where she should not have put her whole game on that challenge. At number 26, I have Jerry. And to me, the biggest issue with Jerry and her game in Heroes vs. Villains is the fact that, not that she couldn't win, because I think honestly, if they vote out Sandra in that spot at 4 and keep Jerry does the exact same thing that Sandra did. On top of that, Jerry has someone on the jury and coach who would fight very hard for her, and I don't think the jury necessarily hated her that much. I think she could have had a great little redemption story. I think the issue is they were never voting out Sandra at any point, because they all thought that she was a huge goat, and her letting Sandra get further in the game by flipping on Boss and Rob there in the late pre-merge, just in the end didn't work out for her. Although it got her far in the game, I think the better long-term move is to flip after the merge. So don't flip. Let Russell, Parvati, and Danielle go home pre-merge, and then at the merge, flip with the heroes, and then you can work with the heroes until you flip back and forth eventually. And by them, I mean her and Coach doing this, because her and Coach seem to be #1 allies. And so I think, to me, the biggest thing is she flipped too early, and it ruined her game to the point where now she's in it with Sandra, someone who kind of took her spot at the end in a way. At number 25, I have Terry Dietz. Again, Terry is so complicated because, like, on one hand, he was always winning the game no matter who he got to the end against. I think he probably beat Suri at the end, which is saying something. Considered Suri's probably the best player from this season. And on top of that, a very likable person, especially for this jury of mostly Kasaya. But I just think, to me, Terry was playing the game in a way that this jury really, really respected and would have voted for if he got to the end, especially people like Bruce and Courtney and Shane, who were bitter at Danielle and Aris. Whoever would have gotten to the end with him, probably, I would say he would have taken Danielle with him, I guess, meaning that it's Danielle. I do not think Danielle could have beaten Terry. I think the issue is I personally don't respect his game really at all. I mean, he didn't control any votes post-merge at all, not one single vote. I think overall his game is one that I just personally would not respect. At number 24, I have Tina Weston's game from Survivor Blood vs. Water, and I think the big thing from this game is the fact that Tina was in a great spot going into the merge, and when she came back from Redemption Island, she was going to win the game if she got to the end against Jervis and Monica. I think the issue is it was always going to be Tyson or her winning that last challenge, and I know some people think that she would have beaten Tyson. So let's say, for an example, that Tyson wins the last challenge and instead decides to vote out Jervis, for an example, and take Monica and Tina to the end with him. I think in that spot, Tyson still probably wins the game, and I think I would personally vote for Tyson there as well. I think the issue is, and the thing that gives her some hope, is the fact that if for some reason Tyson loses there and Monica flips, it's like a Tyson versus, for an example, a Tina Weston fire making challenge. I think in that spot, she could beat Tyson in a fire making challenge. I think the issue there obviously is it's such a small chance that she even gets the shot to make fire. I think most likely, and what actually happened, she just gets voted right back out at Final Four. I think in the end Tyson wins this season most times, but if it's not Tyson, it's probably Tina. Similar to Tina, I think Ozzy from South Pacific probably wins the season, if not for just that last challenge. He simply lost. It's as simple as that. If he wins it, he wins the season. Maybe I don't respect his game as much, although again, he came into the merge with a fighting shot and also controlled his own tribe and actively tried some strategies to get the numbers, but then again, he just mismanages Cochran, who I think it was in Cochran's best interest not to flip in that spot, as obviously he just gets booted out at the 7th spot once his own tribe is gone. So it's not like it was a great move for Cochran to flip on him. So the fact that Cochran still flips on him is bad for Ozzy's social game. On top of that, I think, again, Ozzy's whole game comes down to winning at 4, and he just could not do it. It's a fail on his part, and that's why he's not a Survivor winner. Continuing with this trend of people who just simply had to have that last challenge and just simply did not pull it out, I have at 22 Rick Devens, someone who I think obviously this circumstances are a little bit more forgiving here because of the existence of Edge of Extinction, and also the fact that he didn't know Chris was going to give up his necklace and fire. It wasn't as cut and dry for him, but still he had to win in the end here, and he just didn't. And I think the fact that his game came down to that, and that his threat level was so gigantic that no one wanted to work with him at 4, I think that's the biggest issue, is that his game came down to that last challenge and winning it, and he just simply didn't. At number 21, I have Jonathan's game from Survivor 42, the most recent final juror, and I think the big issue with his game is that it kind of falls apart towards the end when the jury kind of turns sour on his attitude in the game. He seemed to become really exhausted, let the elements really get to him. Now obviously I know he can't really control the whole fact that he's a gigantic monster and like literally like Iron Man, and that he needs more calories, but in the end he has to adapt, and he simply could not, and became more of a nuisance around camp than a provider towards the end, which really soured the jury on his chances of winning. At number 20, I have Holly from Survivor Nicaragua. And I feel like to me, the biggest thing with Holly is the fact that she starts out the game kind of on the wrong foot and kind of moves into a great strategical role. I think the issue is she was with some people who just didn't want to go to the end with her. She knew that and instead kind of put her game on being able to kind of get a last second push to get out somebody else, like for an example, a Fabio. And again, she got unlucky. Fabio went out and that really took her spot at the end. I think if she gets to the end, she has a tough time beating Chase, but I think it is possible. And for that reason, she has to be in this top 20 because she really did have a good shot to win the game. And she had a plan that could have been executed with the right luck. And she just didn't get that luck, sadly. At number 19, I have Ian, someone who I think honestly played the game well throughout, was in an alliance within his own tribe's dominant alliance. So he was like the onion within the onion of his tribe. I think on top of that, he plays the game well physically, socially, strategically. He makes moves. And at the end, he even recognizes that Mike is too big of a threat and tries to take him out. But he's caught red-handed, and then we get like that really fun storyline like the last 2 episodes where it's just everyone against Ian because they figure out how much he is trying to play the game. I do like that he recognized that Mike was too big of a threat and needed to go. He just didn't execute that. And so for that reason, I'll value him over people who wanted to go to the end with the big target from their season and didn't realize how much of a jury threat they were. But I can't value it anymore because he was unsuccessful in his blindside attempt of Mike. At number 18, I have Ty from Game Changers, someone who I think in the pre-merge helps his alliance gain the majority, which really helps his alliance gain the majority at the start of the merge, starting to knock out, you know, people like Haley and also people like Ozzy, for example, Debbie. I think it really helped that pre-merge tribal when the 2 tribes joined together. Ty's idol finding ability really helps his alliance, and I think from there he navigates the post-merge pretty well. At number 17, I have Maddie from Gabon, someone who I think was one sugar crying fit, you know, emotional decision away from winning the game. I mean, it was supposed to be a 3-1 vote on Bob, and if it is, he goes to the end with Susie and Sugar and wipes the floor with them. On top of that, he still had a shot in fire, couldn't make fire. That's on him. I think he's so close to winning the game. One of the few likable people towards the end of this game, positions himself in a good spot where after they flip on him, he's in a good spot where he can go to the yellow tribe's alliance and kind of flip back and forth, and ends up working out for him. He just can't make fire at the end. At number 16, I have Keith Nail, and you may be saying, really, like Keith's game from San Juan del Sur, how is that a top 16 game? But I feel like to me the big thing is the fact that if he gets to the end, because the jury is of a bunch of guys, basically a bunch of bros, and also Jeremy, I think Jeremy would probably vote for a girl there in that scenario, but I think every other guy on the jury, which was every person on the jury except for Baylor there, I think they would all vote for someone like, for an example, a Keith, because he's the most similar person to them. I think Keith beats Jacqueline and Missy pretty easily. Now, if it's Natalie there with Keith, it's more tough, but I think he could at least have a chance there, which is saying more than most of the people behind him on this list. At number 15, I have Kelly Wentworth, someone who I think honestly plays a great idol play, but then more importantly, uses that idol play to launch herself in the game farther. She just needed one more round before there were blindsides on other players. She used that to kind of slip through the cracks and get almost all the way to the end. And I think if for some reason Jeremy lost immunity at Final Four and instead of him winning, she won, I think we could see Jeremy getting booted out. And I think her versus Spencer versus Tasha at the end is a win for her. It's a very unlikely scenario. I give her probably like a 20% chance there. But then again, from where she came in at the post-merge at the start, I think is a pretty good shot to win the game, a 20% chance there. I think that's pretty good odds for her. Number 14, I have the one, the only Johnny Fairplay. I think honestly sometimes he gets a little overrated just because he's such a good character, similar to someone like Cass, but obviously in a whole different level because his game still is very impressive if you take out his great confessionals and his fun shenanigans. And so I feel like the biggest thing for me is the fact that he does kind of flip back and forth during this post-merge stretch several times, kind of doing what Rob Cesternino did before him, but I think maybe a little bit worse of a version because I think he doesn't have as good of a shot to win. Although I think he could have beaten Lil, I don't think he probably beat Sandra at the end. I think that's really the big thing. I think a good swing vote, like for example, a Rupert would vote Sandra over fair play. At 13, I have Sydney from Survivor Co. Wrong, someone who I think, again, really navigated her post-merge very well, flipping back and forth at the right time. I think the issue is she made two enemies much more severely than she had to by flipping on Jason and Scott in the way and at the time that she did, and those really proved costly, as I think if she had Jason and Scott in her corner, she probably gets to the end a lot easier, and on top of that, when she gets to the end, has two cheerleaders for her on her tribe who can tell her story of coming from that train wreck of a bronze tribe. So I think, to be honest, that's her biggest flaw, is the way that she flips on Scott and Jason there, losing them and actually gaining them as main enemies. At number 12, I have Devin from Survivor HHH, someone who gets in an alliance with Ryan and really uses that bond, and on top of that, gets in one with Christy and uses that as well. His only thing that he really does wrong is, I guess, not get Ben out early enough, because really at about 8 after the JP boot, I think Ben just became target number 1, and it was every round it has to be Ben. If they had done it before that and not let it get that far and kind of procrastinate on that, maybe it doesn't become Ben finds an idol every round or Ben gets saved by a bad twist. And so for me, the biggest thing is definitely the fact that they didn't get out Ben early enough. At number 11, I have Sarah's game from Winners at War, one that I could have put higher. The only issue is, again, she had that blindness of going to the end with Tony and wanting to do that, which to me was game suicide. If we're ranking off pure strategical and social gameplay for all of these 42 people, I think Sarah could be number 1 on the list. The issue is, of course, she has that same characteristic that like the bottom 10 on this list have, where she had someone who was obviously going to beat her at the end, and she was blinded and wanted to go to the end with that person at any cost. And so I'm not going to put her in that bottom 10 with them because her gameplay is so good, but I have to kind of split it in the middle and put her around this spot. At number 10, I have Rodney, someone who some people may not like, but he undoubtedly played a great game. In the pre-merge, he built up an alliance that he really built up towards the merge, really dominated the whole game as far as numbers go, and did a great job of really putting Mike on the bottom after his auction episode mistake. And really after that, it was just Mike winning out that ruined his game. Besides that, I think he probably beats Will. He could beat Mama C at the end. I think he beats Shirin. I think he beats Dan. I think he beats tons of people towards the back half of the game. It's just Mike winning out that really ruins his game. At number 9, I have Lauren Ashley Beck from Survivor IOI. I think her game, again, very impressive. Socially, I think she was the better option compared to Tommy. And on top of that, I think she did actually hold a torch to Tommy as far as jury. I think she could have beaten Tommy. I think this jury, especially one that was very racially diverse, would have preferred a Lauren win, although I think the gameplay isn't even close. Tommy just won up Lauren at almost every single corner. I will say, though, I think the jury itself may have picked Lauren based off of her demographic, her being a woman and a POC in this new kind of woke era starting around this time. I think they may have picked her, but we'll just never know because she kind of got booted out at 4 and Tommy kind of let it happen. Now, I'll admit, when I did this list, I did not want to just do numbers because that's really boring and I like having a fun time. So instead, I did it on the tier ranker. I did a D tier, a C tier, a B tier, A tier, and an S tier. Now we're about to hit A tier, which will be 4 people, and S tier is also 4 people. Just letting you guys know, I feel like you guys may have wanted to know that these 8 kind of separate from the rest of the players. Really, it ends with Lauren and starts with our next person at number 8, who is Kathy from Marquesas. And I feel like, to me, the biggest thing with Kathy's game is it's just her end game. She really does that great. From final 9, she realizes that she needs to flip, gets Nalia to convince Pascal to do so. They pagong the row 2-4, and then at 5 she's able to boot out Vesepia's number 1 ally in Sean, which benefits her game because now her and Vesepia can kind of work together in a way which benefits her game, because now her and Vesepia can work together in a way that just couldn't happen before with Sean there. Then at 4, she uses Vesepia for a deal that keeps her in the game and allows her to draw a rock. And then after that, we see her kind of get crossed at 3 by Vesepia, and that's really what keeps her from the end, where she would have won against Vesepia or Nalia, which to me is super impressive. At number 7, I have David, someone who I think is much easier to talk about. He's in control of the whole game. He kind of shifts in the post-merge, is able to make flips, make blindsides. He plays his great idle play on Jessica during the pre-merge, which saves Jessica, which really helps him later on in the game, because Jessica takes the bullet for him at Final 10 when he draws rocks. It really does come back to pay him. And I think, to me, the biggest thing is just his strategical ability. At number 6, I have Malcolm's game from Survivor Philippines, a game that I feel like wins a lot of times, and he just, again, simply could not win the last challenge. The difference is his game during the game was very impressive. Unlike people like, for example, Rick Devens or Tina Weston or Ozzy in South Pacific, I feel like, to me, although he also had to win that last challenge, I feel like he put himself in a better spot socially, where he did have other options. He could have gone to Denise at Final 4 and tried to get her to tie it up. Whereas, and I think once Rick Devens lost that challenge, once Tina lost that challenge, once Ozzy lost that challenge, their games were over immediately. And at number 5, I have Yao-Man, someone who I think plays the game fantastically, really revolutionizes how one can use the idol. He really shows that you can use it in very crazy ways. On top of that, he plays a great social game. Everybody loves Yao-Man. He's a big jury threat, and in the end, he just didn't stay true to his deal, and that's really the downfall of Yao-Man. All right, we got Final 4. To me, again, these people are on their own tier. This is the best of the best, the S tier. And to start it off, I have Lex at 4, someone who controlled the entire game from start to finish, and the only reason he lost was because of simply him losing that last challenge. Him or Ethan should have won that challenge. It was 2 guys versus an old lady. That should have never been the case. It was kind of a fluke, and it was just very, very good luck on her end, because Ethan has said it in the past interviews that he would have taken Lex to the end, and making Lex probably beat Ethan at the end, meaning that Lex only needed him or Ethan to win that challenge in order for him to win the game. And instead, of course, the old lady just happens to win. It's very fluky, and honestly, he should have won that season. He was a very, very great player and really controlled the entire game. At number 3, I have Rafe from Survivor Guatemala, and I think the big thing with him is he also controlled the entire game, but the difference is that he was super likable. I think that someone like Stephanie, who kind of controlled the game with him, had no chance against him at the end, because he was so likable and so nice and so kind. And it's really hard to play the game hard and cutthroat and blindside without people hating you, and he did that by far. It's very, very impressive, although I will say he didn't have as much control as this next person on the list. At number 2, I have Rob Cesternino, and to me, the biggest thing with Rob is the fact that Rob did what Rafe did, but Rafe needed Stephanie as well with him, whereas Rob did that all on his own. He was also the first one to do the flipping back and forth, the blindside, 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 and he did it perfectly. He just simply could not win that last challenge. Rob definitely plays a very different game than the number 1 person on this list, whereas Rob, to me, kind of always felt like on the bottom, but not really on the bottom, like kind of iffy, because he's flipping back and forth. I feel like, to me, Sari in Micronesia was always on top, and out of the people in her alliance, executed the most blindsides and exerted the most power. I think between her and Parvati, she did more than Parvati, and although Parvati created the alliance, I think Sari had more power in the alliance. She was also the most likable person, and on top of that, the reason why she doesn't win isn't really her fault, as they kind of did a surprise Final 2 there. So I think not only is she in power, not only is she the best player on her season and one of the best ever, I think on top of that, she gets screwed by production, so it's not her fault. I think with that all combined, I have to put her at number 1. But what do you think? Which rankings to you do you disagree with? Which rankings were you like, exactly, I agree all the way? Let me know down in the comments. Expect the merge boot and first boot rankings coming up very, very soon. Again, none of this happens without you guys. Without you guys, I'm just a weird guy swinging a weird microphone. So as always, thank you. And if that's it, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.